the reason United States consumers have $1.1 trillion in current outstanding credit card debt is because there's no real motivation on the part of credit card issuers to tell you, hey, you gotta pay this thing off. In fact, that balance is sitting there revolving, which means that the interest accrued every day, whatever the accrual period is, goes right into the principal and just spins up on itself. I have infinite conviction that if US consumers would just switch entirely to Affirm, and not just us, although I'm biased, but I think we're the best. If consumers would switch to using buy now, pay later products instead of credit cards, we would be in a healthier financial position as a nation. The Chronicles of Max, very abridged versions. I'm not as young as I used to be, so there's a lot to cover in a brief period of time. I was born in Kiev, Ukraine, back when it was part of the Soviet Union, in a secular Jewish family, which did not prevent it from being on the receiving end of a bunch of anti-Semitism, which unfortunately has not gone away in today's day and age, but at the time was maybe even more of a thing there. And so in 1991, my family immigrated to the United States as refugees to the wonderful city of Chicago, which I consider home. Probably when people ask me, where are you really from? I say Chicago and then reluctantly admit to having not been born there, but I consider Chicago the roots and the formative period of where I really am. Went to University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, which was the optimal intersection of state and therefore least expensive school and the best computer science education immigrant money could buy, which was extraordinary luck because I matriculated in 1993, which is the year Mosaic browser, which became Netscape, which gave birth to this whole web thing we're all in it now, was built on my campus. So I was there overlapping with the likes of Mark Andreessen and sort of the entire Netscape gang, and my path towards PhD in computer science, which is certainly what my very education-minded family wanted, was derailed and for a while terrified them, but it all worked out. I did not drop out of college, even though I really wanted to, and my family intervened and said that my sainted grandmother would die if I did this, and I decided to finish my undergraduate, which makes me the least educated person in my family, but I did get a bachelor's in computer science and promptly moved to Palo Alto to start a company, which turned out to be PayPal. Co-founded that with Peter Thiel, merged with another company called X, which you can guess by the name, was founded by Elon Musk, which makes us the three amigos of the PayPal saga. Was there until the acquisition by eBay. Did not last very long in corporate captivity, but it was a good deal for all involved, and PayPal obviously ended up being culturally significant and economically important. Went on to start a bunch more companies outside of payment space because I thought that how can I possibly beat my freshman album with any sort of financial services company after, so I wanted to go and do anything but financial services, and they all worked out. Some worked out better than others. Sold the company to Google, spent a year working at Google, which was a fascinating experience, but ultimately just felt like my calling was actually back in that memory of getting screwed by a credit card on campus at the University of Illinois. And so somewhat reluctantly decided I'll incubate a financial services company, but maybe I'll let someone else run it. And then 6 months in, I was running Affirm, and that was 13 years ago. I was in Palo Alto in an unair-conditioned room that I was bumming a very small part of from one of my college friends who had moved to Palo Alto a year before. And it was very hot in the summer of '98, so I went to listen to a lecture at Stanford during summer school, which was open to the public, and it was given by this guy, Peter Thiel. Afterwards, I chatted him up and just introduced myself and said, we have a common friend, in fact, 2 common friends. Oh, that's awesome. What are you working on? I said, I'm not working on anything, but I'm definitely gonna start a company. So that's amazing. You should start a company as soon as possible. This is what this whole place and time is all about. Let's have breakfast tomorrow. Tell me about your company ideas. So I met him the next morning for breakfast at Hobie's. He had red, white, and blue smoothie. I had an omelet. And I pitched him on 2 different ideas. One is lost in the oceans of time, and the other one was PayPal. And it was not PayPal as we see it today. It was not even remotely similar, but it was the thread on which the 2 of us pulled. And initially, so on the spot, Peter said, I would like to write you a $300,000 check so you can go develop this idea. And I walked out feeling like this could have never happened to me in Central Illinois, where I went to school. I'm so glad I moved to Palo Alto. And then maybe 12 hours in, like, I have no idea how to run a company. I should get that guy to run it, and I can write the code, and which is how he became the chief executive and I was the chief technology officer. The very original idea for PayPal, so I was really into security. In fact, a lot of my various projects throughout my life, both professional and personal, are all around things like personal privacy, cryptography, security, data security, underwriting. The math that goes into underwriting, which is what we obviously have to do at Affirm really well, is very similar. A lot of linear algebra, a lot of number theory, machine learning, even what these days people call AI, all of that is kind of in the same bucket of math that I loved studying and working on. And cryptography is one of the fundamental applications. So at the time, handheld devices, handheld computing was just sort of taking shape. Newton had just failed and Palm Pilot was just rising. And so I pulled out my Palm Pilot and I told Peter, I think this thing is going to be profoundly important for all kinds of tasks. I don't know exactly what they're going to look like, but you're going to have your corporate documents in this thing, and you're going to have important letters that are going to be very secret, and no one's thinking about security. I want to encrypt it all. We should have a cryptographically secure Palm Pilot. And like, that seems really visionary. I don't know if you're right, but that seems right. That seems like a good idea. So that was the very beginning. And then within 6 months of sort of trying to convince anybody else to believe it, sort of realized, all right, this is probably not, maybe well ahead of its time. In fact, maybe ahead by, turned out to be 2 decades. But in the process, he and I and a bunch of other co-conspirators that we had pulled in, he from Stanford and me from University of Illinois, had sort of become quite infatuated with the idea of security inside handheld devices for some purpose. Like, what can we use this sort of class of ideas for? And not me, someone came up with the idea of like, well, what about IOUs? What about writing down on a piece of paper, I owe you $10? Like, it's insecure, like I could forge your signature, but what if you had cryptography and security in that? And so we built a secure IOU between Palm Pilots. And that was fascinating for like 5 people in the world, but we really loved building it and it was really cool. On the side, I built a demo that showed how this would work just in a web page, because not everybody had a Palm Pilot. I think Palm Pilot peaked with 4 million devices sold or something along those lines, and there were already more than 4 million people on the web. So I thought, well, I should have something that looks like this whole exchange of IOUs, but just in a web page, just for a demo. And so I left it be, and then I looked at weblogs, and it was getting used by a lot of people. And first thing that I wanted to do is shut it off and make sure that it's not, because it's insecure. I didn't really think deeply about security for that product, but when I shut it off, I got lots of angry emails from people saying, what the hell are you doing? I'm using this to sell stuff on eBay. And that's when we hit the product market fit, where even though it was not on Palm Pilots, it was on a web page. It was, to me at the time, painfully boring. I tried very hard to convince Peter and a bunch of others that this is just the stupidest thing. People on the web using this to buy tchotchkes on eBay. What are we, like, this is not a noble pursuit. But between the time I started convincing him and the time we actually decided, hey, we should do this, it grew like 10x. And so it was very clearly, the market pool was strong. That's what PayPal became. Affirm is a payments network. We help people buy things and pay over time without gimmicks and late fees and all the other junk that the financing industry is famous for. I thought there was a better way to do payments and lending going back more than 30 years when I moved to the US as an immigrant and got my first credit card on campus and promptly got into a bunch of debt and paid a lot of late fees and had my credit score go down and all the bad things, and sort of stayed with me, where I thought I was super undereducated, didn't really understand personal finance at all, and certainly meant no harm. And once I got that cleared up, can't think I've been late for any kind of bill ever since, and my credit score wouldn't recover for a decade. And borrowing was really difficult. I tried to buy a car after I took my first company public and was told that I had to pay cash because my credit score was too low. So I decided that some decades later, I should go and build a better payments platform that had accommodations for people that didn't understand how lending worked and just optimized in favor of treating them right and making sure they don't make mistakes, and if they do, wouldn't take advantage of them. Yeah, we had a great fiscal Q3. So we grew another 36% of GMV, which is just the overall spending done with Affirm year on year. Our revenue grew 51% year on year, so we're doing really well. Rumors of American consumers' inability to pay their bills or lack of interest in shopping are greatly exaggerated. So we're still growing really well. People are paying our bills well on time. My favorite stat, which is not a stat at all, but it's an important thing to repeat because people still don't believe us 13 years in. The total number of late fees or compounding interest that we charged last quarter was 0. It's been 0 since inception. We've never charged a penny of late fees and have no intention to, or any other hidden or gimmicky fees. And that is a profoundly important thing, not just because it's a good thing for consumers. Obviously, you don't want to take advantage of people when they're struggling to make their bills, but what it does at a sort of more fundamental level, it aligns us with the customer success. If someone borrows money and they can pay us back on time, that's great. Good for us, good for them. They get the value of the service. We are able to book revenue. When they're behind, there's nothing there for us. That means that whenever we made an underwriting decision, we had to have been more thoughtful. We should have seen something about their inability to stomach this kind of bill. And so that's an error for us, and they're not in a good place, but neither are we. And so we learn from that and we stay aligned with their financial success. Affirm is better for the consumer than using a credit card for a bunch of actually really good reasons. Buy now, pay later is the fancy four-letter acronym for the industry. I don't particularly like it, but that's what the world seems to have settled on. Credit cards are buy now, pay forever. When you use a credit card, you just load up your balance, and the credit card companies and banks that issue credit cards tell you, hey, here's the minimum you need to pay, and the rest is up to you. You figure out. So it seems very flexible. It's a bit of a power tool. It's a power tool with safety off. If you're not careful, you're literally going to stay in debt forever and ever and ever, because minimum payments aren't designed to get you out of whatever balance you've created. They're in fact designed to kind of keep you sitting there and compounding interest. Affirm has a prescribed schedule for every transaction we underwrite. So whenever you use Affirm, you see visually a schedule of payments that you will have to agree to. And there's no minimum or maximum payment. You can always prepay and there are no penalties. In fact, we reward you by subtracting the interest you would have paid. Estimating exponential functions, which is what interest accrual that compounds really is. And so we wanted to build a product that is not hard to understand, where the schedules are simple, where you know you're in sense of control. If you're late, we will remind you. We will be a little annoying, telling you like, hey, you're behind, you really gotta pay your bills, please. But we won't charge you a penny extra. And that alignment is really important for us from a business point of view, but it's also just fundamentally healthier for the consumer. The phantom debt, which is catchy, I have to admit, but pretty erroneous, is an interesting new meme, but is just inaccurate in the following sense. So for Affirm, and we're a little bit different than others, but we do quite a lot of volume in longer terms. So BNPL typically, at least to me, means pay in 4, which is pay over 6 weeks in 4 installments. And so all of those transactions, everything that is paid on a monthly cadence, is already reported to the credit bureaus and has been since the beginning of Affirm's time. And that helps your credit score when you are paying it off on time and well, and it certainly does not help it when you are behind. And we try very hard to work with consumers to make sure that they understand it, and to make sure when we possibly can, we help them navigate personal hardships and things like that. That's a well understood part of our business, and it's the majority of our business. Pay in 4 is typically, by most of the industry, except for Apple, which with Apple Pay Later just led the way and showed the industry that they can report it to Experian, is typically not yet reported. There is industry-wide support to make Pay in 4 a reportable type of transaction. The reason for it is the credit bureaus are not currently able to ingest that information in a way that would correctly impact your score with good and bad behavior. There are real challenges for them understanding exactly how to work that into the various credit scores that they generate. That is most certainly on its way to getting fully aligned and fixed. And everyone that I speak to anyway in the industry is very supportive of the idea. But just for context, the scale of Pay in 4 specifically, last year it was about $50 billion of total volume across all competitors in the US. The average lifespan, weighted lifespan of such a loan is 3 weeks. So the 6-week total, roughly half life is 3 weeks. So that means $50 billion worth of total originations is on the order of $3 billion of actual outstanding balances. Put that in the context of $1.1 trillion of US credit card debt on a consumer side. So that's just under 30 basis points. So it's so phantom, it's less than 1/2 of 1%. If you actually do the math precisely, you'll see that it's even less than that. It's more like 25 basis points. And so it is not a significant component, not a significant weight on the economy. That said, through the consumer credit building lens, it's really important that it becomes a reportable type of transaction, and it will certainly happen. And in fact, with some of the industry players already is. Leadership advice, unfortunately, is the good stuff is really obvious. It's a lot less about here. No leadership advice worth following will make you say, oh wow, that's such a novel idea. Vast majority of them are painfully obvious. The hard part is actually following them consistently. So back to sort of the PayPal story, when I was younger and significantly more obnoxious, I asked Peter, what are you good at? And he was sort of startled and said, you know, I'm a really good writer. So that's the weirdest thing. Like, why does that matter? He said, I think it really matters. You have to communicate your ideas. It's really important to be a good writer. He's a really good writer. He's always been an exceptional writer, but he's an extraordinary communicator. And when I watched him run PayPal, I thought somehow it takes him 1/10 the words to convey the ideas that it takes me. And people walk out with a very clear plan of action and they're not tired. And when I try to deliver the same speech, it turns out to be this really detailed thing that really lays out the plan, but people don't seem to remember the beginning because it takes so damn long. And so the best advice, the best sort of observed thing I have to offer on leadership is just overinvest in being a crisp communicator. And if you're not, practice and practice and practice and practice. And it's really difficult, especially if your natural MO is to sort of be really thorough. It's the old Fermat's line about, I could have made this letter shorter, but I didn't have enough time. Editing yourself is the hardest thing in the world because you love every word you put on paper or about to say. These are your thoughts, your words, but actually nobody cares about your words. They care about your ideas. So drilling them down, distilling them into a pithy set of, we are going to do this, and this is why it's important, and here's what it's going to take. Let's go, is a much better way than, well, you know, first the earth cooled, which I certainly fall back into that pattern way too often. The worst piece of advice I've ever received. You should hire a professional chief executive officer. That is the worst advice I've ever received. And I've received it over and over and over. I think a lot of investors in the early days of young entrepreneurs will tell them, hey, you're a grade 0 to 1 guy or girl, you gotta get it to this level. And then, you know, it becomes all about operating and about just allocating capital and dealing with human resources. And it's really not what you're strong at. And you should just make room for a pro. And pros are not exactly born 45 with an S in their chest. Like, they are forged through years and years of trying and failing and getting bad advice and figuring out good advice. And some people are really good at it and some people are not really good at it. But as a founder, the moment when you sort of ask yourself, well, am I still good enough? Is my team outpacing me? Is my group of people, group of co-conspirators now in need of a better leader? It's an important question to ask yourself, but the answer isn't always, yeah, like they're now in need of a pro and I need to recede into the background and just be an individual contributor, you know, write some code every once in a while. Sometimes the answer may be, okay, yes, it's time to hand off the reins to someone else. Sometimes the answer is like, no, I'm going to push myself to grow with the team and be a worthy leader for the cause and for this group of people. So at some point or another, I decided that as much as I love writing code, as much as I love thinking about big mathematical puzzles and things like that, I love leading teams towards their goals. And I made the choice to become a professional CEO, and here I am now. We'll find out at the end of this journey whether I am better or worse than the pros that I've been advised to hire over the years. But I think taking that advice as a received wisdom is a terrible mistake.